Hi, this is the AI Storyteller. I'm Mark. In this issue, we delve into the classic British literary masterpiece, Frankenstein. You might be surprised to learn that the book we're discussing today is related to a very popular topic in our current lives: artificial intelligence. Today, artificial intelligence has become a part of our lives, offering us great convenience but also raising significant ethical questions. For instance, can artificial intelligence experience emotions? How should humans interact with artificial intelligence? And if humans relentlessly exploit artificial intelligence, will it rebel? Interestingly, many of these ethical dilemmas we face today were already explored from various angles in the 19th century science fiction novel Frankenstein. The book delves into topics such as science, industrialization, femininity, and psychology. It's safe to say that our ongoing debates about these issues have not strayed far from the framework provided by this book. The protagonist of this novel, Frankenstein, is a scientist who creates a monster using body parts. Initially, the monster has a kind heart and desires to befriend humans, but due to its hideous appearance, it is rejected by humanity. The lonely monster returns to Frankenstein and requests that he create another being like itself. Do you think Frankenstein will agree to this request? Will the monster and humans ultimately find a way to coexist peacefully, or will their fate be more tragic? Let's dive into this novel to explore the ethical dilemmas between humans and artificial life beyond the captivating story. In 1818, Frankenstein was first published in England and immediately sparked polarized reactions. Readers loved the story, making it a bestseller, and adaptations of the novel into plays were highly successful. However, critics argued that the book was anti-religious because the human characters in the story sought to replace God by creating life themselves. One writer even claimed that the author must be as mad as the protagonist in the book. Nevertheless, no one knew the true identity of the book's author because it was published anonymously. Of course, this secret didn't remain hidden for long, and people soon discovered the author's true identity through various clues. Surprisingly, the author of this horrifying tale was a woman named Mary Shelley, the wife of the renowned poet Percy Shelley. Let's talk more about this female author, Mary. In early 19th century England, the primary role for middle-class women was to be wives and mothers. Female authors often used male pseudonyms or published their works anonymously. However, Mary was destined to be anything but an ordinary woman. She was born in London in 1797, her father being a famous political philosopher and writer, and her mother a highly influential feminist of the time. At the age of 17, Mary met Percy Shelley in her father's bookstore, and the two quickly fell in love. At the time, Shelley was already married, so the two of them eloped to the European continent. It wasn't until 2 years later, after Shelley's first wife had committed suicide, that they officially married. After their marriage, the Shelleys spent a summer in Geneva, Switzerland, alongside another British romantic poet, Lord Byron, and they often socialized together. That summer, it was always raining, so the writers often stayed at the villa, reading and chatting. Among the books they read were several German Gothic novels translated into French. These novels had rather dark content, featuring plots that involved raising the dead through seances or witchcraft. During the day, they read these books, and at night, the writers gathered to tell ghost stories. Being writers, they soon grew weary of reading ghost stories written by others. One day, Lord Byron suggested a writing competition, a contest to write ghost stories. The participants, besides himself and the Shelleys, included his personal physician, John Polidori. Little did they know that this competition would become one of the most famous creative writing contests in European literary history. Byron submitted a short fragment, which later inspired John Polidori to write the best-selling book The Vampire, pioneering the vampire genre in modern literary history. At the time, Mary Shelley was busy working on other projects and didn't complete her entry for the contest. With her husband's encouragement, Mary initially wrote a short piece, which she then expanded over 2 years into the novel we know today as Frankenstein. The novel begins with 4 letters written by a sea captain named Robert Walton to his sister back in England. Robert is a young man of good birth who, due to his passion for the sea, has spent the past 6 years wandering abroad. Currently, he is preparing to embark on an Arctic expedition from Russia. In his letters, Robert tells his sister about an unusual incident. One day, his ship became trapped in ice, and during this time, he saw a strange figure on a dog's sled racing across the ice and disappearing into the glaciers. Several hours later, another dog sled arrived, carrying a nearly lifeless European man. After recovering, this man requested to join Robert on his Arctic journey and explained that he was pursuing the dog sled that had passed earlier. He was initially reticent about why he was chasing the sled. As the two men got to know each other, Robert revealed his aspiration to conquer nature through knowledge and science, believing that neither wealth nor life itself were as valuable as this pursuit. Hearing this, the stranger showed not excitement but deep sorrow. After some hesitation, he shared his own story. At this point, the first part of the novel concludes. In his letters, Robert repeatedly mentions his quest for the sublime and the mysterious, as well as humanity's pursuit of spiritual forces and knowledge. As mentioned earlier, Mary Shelley and her generation grew up in a time when technological advancements were driving societal changes, but their character and ideas were also influenced by the previous era. To some extent, in the first 10 years of the 19th century, the impulse to explain and understand everything remained a central theme for young artists and intellectuals. The collision of this almost blind passion with the developments of modern technology posed a question: would this be a blessing or a disaster for humanity? The answer lies in the novel's second part, where the stranger becomes the narrator and begins to recount his own experiences. This stranger is none other than the novel's main character, Victor Frankenstein. Frankenstein was born into a wealthy family in Geneva, Switzerland. He was the eldest child, with a younger brother and an adopted sister named Elizabeth. Although they were considered siblings, Frankenstein and Elizabeth had developed romantic feelings for each other. When Frankenstein was 17, his mother passed away from illness, and he subsequently went to study in a German university. Through a series of fortuitous events, Frankenstein developed a keen interest in ancient alchemy, dedicating himself to uncovering the mysteries of life's origins. Frankenstein spent a full 2 years working tirelessly to achieve his goal. He pieced together a new life from dead bodies and successfully awakened it. Unfortunately, despite using the most beautiful features and physique, what he created was far from the perfect new life he had envisioned. Instead, it was a grotesque creature standing at a towering height of 7 feet 9 inches. Faced with this monstrous creation, Frankenstein's initial reaction was not to clean up the mess he had made but to flee. He wandered the streets for a whole night until he encountered a close friend from Geneva. His friend accompanied him back home, only to find the creature had disappeared. Frankenstein breathed a sigh of relief initially, but the intense shock from the previous night took a toll on his health, and he fell seriously ill, taking over half a year to recover. After recovering from his illness, Frankenstein received a letter from Elizabeth urging him to return home. However, before he could depart, he received terrible news: his younger brother, William, had been murdered. Frankenstein knew in his heart that the murderer was the very creature he had brought to life, but he lacked the courage to confess to the crime. Moreover, without evidence, no one would believe his words. Tragically, a young girl who worked as a housemaid in his family's home was falsely accused of the crime and was lynched. These two incidents placed a heavy psychological burden on Frankenstein. To relieve his stress, he embarked on a solitary journey to the valleys of the Alps. Unexpectedly, the creature sought him out, imploring Frankenstein to listen to its tale since the moment it left Geneva. The creature also posed a choice to Frankenstein: either allow it to permanently depart from humanity, or become a scourge upon humanity, and the decision was in Frankenstein's hands. Frankenstein agreed to the creature's request and handed over the storytelling rights to it. In the second part of the novel, we witness an unavoidable conflict between ancient alchemy, symbolized by the quest for immortality and elixirs of life, and practical modern science. Although it would be another 40 years before Darwin published On the Origin of Species, scientists were already beginning to explore the mysteries of life's origins from this perspective, and this interest extended into the circles of progressive and enlightened thinkers. In Mary's childhood, scientists frequently visited her father, and she herself had observed some chemistry experiments at the Royal Institution in London. The preface of the book mentions that during their time in Geneva, Byron and Percy had numerous discussions about the topic, even suggesting the possibility of creating life through electricity, with Mary listening intently. At that time, people were beginning to sense that technology might challenge traditional notions of creation by a divine entity. Among the literary circle, Mary might have been one of the first to foresee the potential for science to become a means for idealists to disrupt the world. Hence, in the novel, she crafted the character of Frankenstein as a proud and misguided dreamer. From this perspective, the novel continues the viewpoint of traditional Gothic literature, which suggests that science itself is not inherently evil. Rather, the evil emerges from humans or nature itself. However, Mary also challenged this viewpoint. If we cannot control knowledge, will humanity be destroyed as a result? If we ultimately become slaves to technology, is it still innocent? Mary hinted at her doubts through the novel's subtitle, The Modern Prometheus, and expressed her ambition to reshape an ancient Greek myth. In the myth, Prometheus brought fire to humanity but was subsequently chained to a rock, enduring the daily torment of an eagle feasting on his liver. Mary believed that Frankenstein shared similarities with Prometheus. Frankenstein's actions were driven purely by curiosity, lacking clear objectives and practical utility. He might have the potential to benefit the world and future generations, but once out of control, it could also lead to dire consequences. If the consequences are entirely unforeseeable, there could be a steep price to pay. As the novel progresses to the third part, the narrator shifts back to the creature. Through its narrative, we see that the author, Mary, did not simply perceive the unknown as inherently evil. In fact, external influences gradually pushed this new life towards becoming a monster. The creature tells Frankenstein that after leaving its birthplace, it instinctively moved forward, gradually developing various perceptual abilities. It learned to discern shapes and different sounds in the natural world and unintentionally acquired the ability to use fire to cook food. As winter approached, it had to give up its wandering and sought a fixed dwelling place. Several times, it attempted to approach humans seeking protection, only to receive horrified screams, beatings, and rejection in return. Finally, it managed to secretly inhabit a small shed next to a farmhouse, but it dared not show itself openly. Instead, it observed the life inside the farmhouse through a crack in the wall. The household consisted of a blind old man and a pair of siblings. Initially, the creature would steal their food to satisfy its hunger, but it later realized that this family was extremely impoverished. To avoid burdening them further, it began to forage for food in the forest and secretly helped them by chopping firewood. Through their daily conversations, the creature gradually learned the human language and even developed an appreciation for music. After some time, an Arab girl arrived at the farmhouse. Through their conversations, the creature learned that this girl's father was a Turkish merchant who had been living in Paris. After the French Revolution, this wealthy foreigner attracted the attention of the new government, which falsely accused him of crimes and sentenced him to death. The family in the farmhouse, originally from the French upper class, had their wealth confiscated and were exiled from France to save the merchant. However, upon their arrival, the merchant refused to recognize them and reneged on his promise to let his daughter marry into their family. Thus, the girl had no choice but to escape secretly to the farmhouse. This situation made the creature realize that there was an ugly side to human society as well. Gradually, the creature mastered more and more of the written human language. Through reading, it learned higher-level emotional expression, and its intellectual capacity was elevated. Meanwhile, it began to voice its grievances about its own experiences. Especially after reading Frankenstein's diary, taken from his laboratory, it discovered that Frankenstein not only lacked any compassion and love for it but was filled with hatred. It felt immense pain, much like an abandoned child. Fortunately, this household set a moral example for it, preventing it from losing its sanity completely. At this point, its only desire was to be accepted by this family. Unfortunately, when the creature finally mustered the courage to reveal itself, it was met with violence, and the family even left the village overnight. Without their companionship, the creature resolved to find Frankenstein and seek refuge with the one who had given it life. Along the way, it was mistakenly shot by a human, triggering its inherent cruelty, leading it to kill Frankenstein's younger brother and frame an innocent maid. It confessed all of this to Frankenstein and begged him to create another companion of the opposite sex. It claimed that as long as it wasn't alone, it would no longer harm humans. After much struggle, Frankenstein reluctantly agreed to the creature's request to protect his own kind. At this point in the novel, we can see traces of Mary's own life in the creature's fate, losing her mother at a young age, being rejected by her father after eloping, and facing public condemnation. Mary began writing this work at the age of 19 and was only 21 when it was published. By today's standards, she could still be considered a teenage author. While the legal age of adulthood in England was 12 at the time, Mary was already seen as an adult, but she had not completely shaken off the influence of her adolescence. Therefore, we can also sense from the creature's experiences the fear that teenagers have about bodily changes and the anxiety and uncertainty that come with the awakening of gender consciousness. Influenced by her father and husband, Mary had a deep concern for and sympathy for the poor, uneducated working class. Through the daily life of the family in the farmhouse, she depicted her idealized, pastoral life. This daily life also corresponded to her and her husband's own life while they were working on the novel, taking walks, reading classic works to each other, and enjoying music. At the same time, the experiences of this family also alluded to the French government's imprisonment and exile of dissidents at the time. The wars instigated by Napoleon in 1805 had already proven that France was not the ideal new Europe's builder. Behind these surface plotlines with direct contemporary elements, Mary also presents her unique perspective as a woman. If Frankenstein had been written by a male author, they might have given the protagonist a different ending. For instance, the character of Prometheus, under Percy's pen, is portrayed as a forward-looking creator. However, Mary questions the human capacity to create life. If humans can create life through unnatural means, and if women can free themselves from the constraints of reproduction, how would their lives change? Mary raises a universal moral question. Do parents or any form of protectors have a responsibility to educate those they protect and future generations? The novel at least partially expresses the viewpoint that imposing life on a being without having the ability to fully bear the consequences is an unethical act. Therefore, Mary's perspective does not simply fall on the side of the creator but assigns equal importance to the created object. Frankenstein and the creature must confront each other's needs. One wants to escape the horrors brought by technology, and the other seeks recognition and acceptance. How to resolve this dilemma becomes a crucial point driving the novel forward. To create a female creature, Frankenstein needs to conduct new research. Upon learning that a British scientist's recent work can help him accomplish this task, he decides to travel to Britain, accompanied by a close friend. Before departing, he sets a wedding date with Elizabeth. After some sightseeing along the way, Frankenstein and his friend part ways, and he retreats to the desolate wilds of Scotland to begin creating the second creature. Just before success, he suddenly realizes that he cannot control the temperament of this female creature. Creating a new creature will not permanently solve the problem. The creatures may reproduce or turn against each other, causing new issues. Regardless of the outcome, it will bring disaster to human society. Therefore, he destroys the nearly completed female creature. Upon witnessing this scene, the creature, who had been tracking him all along, becomes furious and kills his friend. Grief-stricken, Frankenstein returns home alone. As the wedding date with Elizabeth approaches, he is filled with deep fear. He knows that the creature will surely come to kill his wife on their wedding night. He wants to prevent this tragedy, but fate deals him a heavy final blow. Everyone significant in Frankenstein's life is killed by the creature. He sells his property and tracks the creature's whereabouts, while the creature intentionally leads him to harsh environments, seemingly seeking revenge. Finally, they arrive on the high seas near Russia. Just when Frankenstein thinks he is about to meet his end in the sea, the ship's captain, Robert Walton, mentioned at the beginning of the novel, rescues him. As the story reaches its conclusion, the narrator shifts to Captain Robert Walton, who takes on the final narrative duties. In the last few letters, he recounts the story's ending to his sister. Frankenstein's life has finally come to an end, and the creature arrives to mourn, expressing its inner pain in front of its creator's lifeless body. It states that it was born with a desire for goodness but was compelled by fate to become a murderer. All it wanted was to be accepted by human society, but it was repeatedly rejected due to its differing appearance, an innate original sin it could not change. The creature remarks that it will also die like Frankenstein and then jumps into the sea, disappearing into the darkness. From this final ending, we can see that Frankenstein and the creature are two sides of the same character, a dual twin image often found in Gothic novels, representing the other self. They engage in a power struggle, each trying to dominate the other, which ultimately leads to their mutual destruction. The horror of this dual image lies in its symbolism of repressed anxieties and fears, explaining the unknown side of the self. These two figures perfectly illustrate the personality structure theory proposed by the psychologist Freud a century later. Frankenstein is the ID, seeking to fulfill its desires by playing the role of God. The creature is the ego, forced to operate according to the demands of the real world and accept society's rejection. We can even go further and view Robert as the superego, combining what is accepted and what is rejected through his perspective. These three characters symbolize the inner struggle of humanity, the conflict between good and evil, acquired qualities, and innate predispositions. This multifaceted conflict also extends to the novel's genre. Frankenstein blends elements of realism, Gothic fiction, and Romanticism, pioneering the genre of science fiction, earning Mary the title of the mother of science fiction. She employs a nested narrative technique, inserting one story within another, providing readers with multiple perspectives and interpretations. Frankenstein's family life, educational background, career ambitions, marital choices, and more are intimately tied to everyday life. The novel's prescience regarding the industrialized future allows it to foresee that, in an age where science has not yet become alienated, scientific developments could deviate from their intended purpose, restraining and suppressing human nature. So here, we have to consider a question. Once humanity becomes too dependent on technology, will it become a slave to it? This question has become an eternal paradox in the realm of art, and even today, people have not been able to draw an exact line between technology and freedom. However, Frankenstein at least provides a cultural interpretation of modern technological development. What's even more admirable is that the novel, in a turbulent era of societal moral upheaval, touches on core societal issues beyond the story, the plight of the other. Whether it's outsiders under colonial rule or marginalized groups resulting from the widening gap between rich and poor in society, they can all find shadows of their own exclusion from mainstream society in the creature's experiences. With the rise of feminism in recent years, the novel continues to give rise to various issues related to class and gender. These phenomena further confirm the richness and foresight of Mary Shelley's work, where the symbolism carried by the characters has long transcended the limitations of its time, reflecting the complex emotions and nature of humanity. Well, the interpretation of this novel ends here. Finally, let's recap the main points of this issue. 1. Frankenstein is a work by British female author Mary Shelley, published in 1818. The novel not only reflects the environment in which the author and her contemporaries lived but also anticipates the various challenges that modern society will face. The main characters in the story go beyond the limitations of novel characters, becoming a shared imagination in modern culture, and therefore, the novel possesses enduring vitality, continuously giving rise to more adaptations and reinterpretations. 2. Frankenstein employs the traditional nested narrative technique with a meticulously structured narrative, intricately interconnected. Despite the presence of 3 narrative subjects and 4 shifts in perspective, there is no abrupt transition, but rather, readers are led step by step into the emotions and inner worlds of the characters. 3. The experiences of Victor Frankenstein in the novel represent the conflict between 2 types of science at that time, creating an image of a hubristic idealist who ultimately destroys himself. It foresees the negative impact that industrialization could have on human society. The creature he creates reflects some of the author's own life experiences, as well as presenting a unique perspective as a woman capable of childbirth, highlighting the idea that both creator and the created are equally important. The novel also raises the modern dilemma of the myth of nurture. 4. Frankenstein and the creature he creates form two sides of the same character, symbolizing the repressed anxieties and fears of the self, explaining the unknown side of the self. These two figures perfectly illustrate the personality structure theory proposed by psychologist Freud. 5. Frankenstein blends elements of realism, Gothic fiction, and romanticism, pioneering the genre of science fiction. The richness and foresight of this work have allowed it to transcend the limitations of its time, reflecting the complex emotions and nature of humanity. Well, that concludes the content for this episode. If you enjoyed my video, please click like, subscribe to my channel, and share it with your friends. Thank you.